Well, thanks for joining. Yeah, we started this webinar since we're getting a lot of trial requests on Gradle Enterprise, and a lot of folks didn't know what was going to happen next and what to expect when they submit a trial request. Is a screen of Gradle Enterprise just going to pop up and I connect my builds to it? What's really going on there? They had a lot of questions, so we thought we'd do this nice little short presentation to give you some information about that. Agenda essentially is, when should I consider a trial of Gradle Enterprise? What are the benefits? What's involved? How many hours per week do I got to put in this thing to get some results, right? What kind of support can I get from the Gradle team? That's essentially the agenda. Uh, I'll introduce myself. I'm Ruse. I work at Gradle. I've been at Gradle for 7 something years now. Worked a lot in the open source industry and Android space. I haven't written code in a long time, more on the business side of things, but I've been heavily involved with the trial process of Gradle Enterprise and even the first 10 customers and whatnot. I actually met Nelson from the Android community back in the day, and we worked together on a Gradle Enterprise trial when it was at Square, and then another trial when he was at SoundCloud, when he reached out to us, said, "Hey, we have some super long build times, and we thought Gradle Enterprise could help." And he's recently joined the Gradle Enterprise team. So he has some interesting stories to share because he's been on both sides, right? From the customer side, running the trial and optimizing the builds, to now one of the engineers helping them. Yeah. So Nelson, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, so I recently joined the Gradle team on the Gradle Enterprise. And that's right, I was previously at SoundCloud. I wrote a couple blog posts about using Gradle Enterprise because I really enjoyed it so much. And I really love improving developer builds and productivity, and I really hate wasting time. So Gradle Enterprise is the perfect tool for saving tons of time.
All right, great. Well, happy to do this with you, Nelson. And I'm logging in from San Francisco, and Nelson's logging in from Berlin, and many of you from around the world. And yeah, let's get started. So when is it a good time to start a trial, right? Most of the folks that submit trial requests, just from we've seen so many of them, are, I would say, a good majority around improving build times, whether it's local developer build times or long CI build times, right? Developers start complaining, right? Or maybe they haven't started complaining yet, but you think, hey, this could be much better, right? And then I would say the second highest thing is a reason for doing a trial is, using build scans for debugging purposes. Hey, I love using build scans. We get a lot of that. We love using build scans. We want to get more functionality with using Gradle Enterprise. Or my company won't allow me to use build scans since the build scan metadata goes to Gradle's public cloud, right? Where I work at a whatever company that's really hardcore with security restrictions and whatnot. We need to have build scan data be on premise, and so Gradle Enterprise is on premise solution, so we get a lot of that. And then flaky tests, right? Avoiding build failures, right? Or hey, CI infrastructure is unstable, and we need more data on what's wrong with the inefficiencies of our CI infrastructure, right? Or we just need some data on what's going on in our build process. I remember the Twitter team, they reached out to us, one of the first Gradle Enterprise customers, said, hey, we want to get all the data from build scans. We have some data from our CI servers, but we have no data on what kind of challenges are developers dealing with building from their local machines and laptops on a weekly basis. So yeah, so these are some great reasons that usually folks come in and do a trial for, right? And Nelson, for you at SoundCloud, I remember it was build time related, but yeah, why don't you? I
Yeah,
guess what caused you at one point? What was the turning point for you to say, okay, that's it. I'm going to reach out to the Gradle folks and start a trial. What did it get
yeah.
to for that to happen?
I think for me, developer productivity is so important, and every minute that I waste on builds is is not needed, but also I'm one of those people that finds improving build speeds somewhat of a puzzle. So I really wanted to solve this puzzle, and using the data from Gradle Enterprise is something that really helps with that. But also, what I guess I didn't realize in the beginning is, yeah, Gradle Enterprise can help you a lot with build times, but it also helps you and other engineers debug their builds, look at trends, both in terms of build speeds, but also, like what's the most common cause of build failures. So the trigger point was really, wanting to cut down on build speeds.
And were developers complaining, or were you just being proactive and saying, "Hey, we could do better"? Do you remember?
At that time, it was we could do better. I mean, I think some people, yeah, were complaining. Uh, yeah, it was a combination of both.
All right. All right. Now we have our first poll here to see kind of what are some of the motivations that have brought you to us. And I'm going to kick off this poll here.
I think
So, yeah,
there's two choices because everyone's gonna pick slow build times, but we're curious what the other option is.
yeah. So which one of these, what's your top two, I guess, or your for reaching out to us? What pain points are causing you to potentially want to do a trial? And let's see. All right, so we're getting a lot of build time, inefficient use of CI resources. I'm seeing some of these as they come in, giving you guys the play-by-play flaky tests, inefficient debugging. All right, I think it's good enough to close this poll and share results. All right, so yeah, build times. There you go. It's and to be fair, it is one of the lowest hanging fruits in developer productivity, right? Getting these builds to be speed up, right? No learning from past experience. We should have maybe changed that to, data. Needing more data on your builds and test process and whatnot. Inefficient use of CI resources. Cool, great. Well,
Yeah,
thanks for
I,
sharing that with us,
I
Nelson.
wanted
Yeah,
to,
go ahead.
yeah, bring up a point about learning from past experience, and that's kind of one we kind of glazed over, but having all the data as well as the historical data is really key to understanding what your build situation is like. Like because a lot of times developers like, oh, my build times are slow, and then you ask, well, how slow are they? Um, and then you don't know. So Gradle Enterprise not only helps you fix that problem, but also helps you understand just how slow your build times are, both locally and on CI, and historical data, so you understand how quickly it's becoming worse.
Yeah, it's a good point. And one of my favorite quotes was from Sam Snyder, who set up Gradle Enterprise at Tableau. He's like, "Hey, I want some data on my local developer behavior. Are they running unit tests? Are they doing this? What kind of what?" And the word that he used, a quote that he uses, never always stuck in my head is, "I want to know what kind of crap our developers have been dealing with in the last month." So that stuff, without that data, it's really hard to get the insights to know what's going on. All right. So back to my slides here. Okay, so you get some good things when you do a trial of Gradle Enterprise, right? So first, there are some good benefits from it out of the box, right? Even if you do this 30 days. One is you get access to the Gradle engineering experts during the support that you get during this trial process on what are the best practices to on certain topics, right? That you may or may not know much about, right? You also learn how to be a developer productivity engineer with Gradle Enterprise, right? And what we mean by that is you want to train you on how to use Gradle Enterprise in a very efficient way, right? Hey, I have 1 hour to spend on builds this week. How can I use Gradle Enterprise to get the most out of this 1 hour, right? Because we got a lot on, hey, before Gradle Enterprise, I would spend 8 hours on a particular topic expecting a result, and I get nothing out of it. So we want to teach you how to be a developer productivity engineer with Gradle Enterprise. So if you do decide to move forward with Gradle Enterprise during the after the trial, right, you're kind of gotten up and running, right, and you know what you're doing, and you become successful at it, and you think the way we want to think, right, and be um, proactive and not be reactive around build issues. Hey, I'm going to improve build times because engineers are complaining and whatnot. So we'll want to pass down these best practices around developer productivity engineering to you during this trial process. And of course, we're going to speed up your builds, right? In most trials, we get to speed up everyone's builds fairly substantially by the end of the trial because we want to show results, right? And at the end of the day, you're going to have to, if you want to buy this thing, you're going to have to say, hey, share the results with whoever the decision makers on budget and whatnot to say, hey, this thing worked, right? So we want to show you how to maximize your builds, and we're going to share a lot of that. So most folks coming into this trial, they've seen substantial build time improvement. And of
Yeah.
course, we'll show you how to use the data and how to make sense of it and what to use and how to use it and whatnot, right? And Nelson, for you, I guess, it was the same, right? You guys got a lot out of this trial. Maybe share some of the benefits that you got out of it.
Yeah, I think like you're gonna get a better build at the end of the trial. You're gonna cut down on your build speeds. That's the main thing people ask for. But you'll also learn how to use Gradle Enterprise and understand what things are affecting your build in what way. And you can use that knowledge to apply it not just, when you move on to another company, or if you have multiple projects at your company, you can learn best practices around applying plugins or caching specific Gradle tasks, or configuring your CI and build environment in the most efficient way using the data from build scans.
All right. Thanks for that additional insight. And then, so this slide is about the cost of inaction, right? A lot of folks think, hey, 5-minute build times, it's fine. No one is complaining. And a lot of why we're really, trying to evangelize developer productivity engineering. If you've been to our workshops and our trainings, you see us talking about developer productivity engineering a lot. And a lot of it is, hey, this stuff is really important, right? It's a competitive advantage in the world of whoever ships features faster than their customers wins. But also doing nothing can be quite expensive. And this slide shows, hey, a 200-person engineering team does around, and came from one of our past customers, right? A Java team, around 200 devs, they were doing around 500,000 builds per year, right? The total wait time when they're with a local build time on average 3 minutes within these 200 developers, this is 3 minutes times 500,000 builds per year, right? By 1,200, this wait time came out to 12 engineering years, right? So it's doing nothing, even for a 3-minute local build time, which most folks think, hey, it's not that bad, actually costs you a lot of money. There's a lot of room for improvement there. We saw in one Android team, we improved build times by 30 seconds. And we thought, oh, okay, that's the most that we could do for local builds. But once you add up the number of local builds that they were doing with Gradle Enterprise, you say, hey, they're doing 3,000 local builds per month. That 30 seconds ended up in 2 full-time engineers that they would get back, right? So doing nothing is quite expensive. And that's the point of this trial, of this slide here. And so what does the trial journey look like? I'm going to quickly run through this one. So you're going to register for the trial, then you're going to install it, and you're going to configure your builds. Then we're going to have a trial kickoff meeting with you. All right, we'll meet with you to kind of help guide you through this trial process. And we'll give you our trial navigator, which is a step-by-step on how to get the most out of Gradle Enterprise. And then we'll capture baseline data based on what your success criteria is. Let's say you want to improve local build time. So what is it now? Okay, well, we're starting at 3 minutes now. Let's see how much faster we can get. Or our CI build time is, 10 minutes with unit tests. How much faster can we get this, right? And then we'll help you tune your build settings, and then we'll optimize your build cache and your incremental builds. And at the end of, we'll use the data from your Gradle Enterprise trial to say, hey, was this thing worth it? Should I buy this thing or not? We call this ROI, this return on investment. So that's kind of the trial journey, a quick overview of it. Now let's dive into little bits and pieces. So first of all, what happens when you reach out the registration trial form, right? Gradle Enterprise team will reach out to you. We'll assign you a project manager for your trial. This person, it will be your point of contact for everything you need. Hey, I need some documentation to do X, Y, and Z. How do I do that? Or I lost some time during my trial process. I need to extend the trial license another week. How can you help me with that? Stuff like that, right? We'll also assign a solutions engineer to you. Hey, I'm not getting anything from my remote cache. What's going on? Your solutions engineer will be your point of contact from all that. And they'll give you these step-by-step and train you to get the most out of your builds based on what you want to accomplish from your trial, right? And then we're going to, work with you to set commitment, time expectations and whatnot, and explain the installation requirements. So all this happens once you fill out this trial form.
Yeah,
And then
and feel
go
free
ahead.
to fill out that form, even if you have questions and we don't cover those questions during this trial. Like, we're very happy to answer any questions, and don't let that prevent you from filling out that form.
Yeah, great point. Thanks for bringing that up. And what is expected of you during this trial, right? A lot of folks think, well, I don't have, 30 hours a week to spend on a Gradle Enterprise trial, right? And that's totally fine, So we expect you to at least have seen a Gradle Enterprise demo. There's a new one that we're publishing soon, and be familiar with the use cases, or attend a workshop or whatnot. We have a lot of free training and videos on our Gradle Enterprise, so it's know kind of what you want to get into, and determine your pain points and your trial objectives. Hey, I want to do this trial to improve X, Y, and Z, right? I want to improve local build times. I want to improve CI build times. I want to improve build times with unit tests, right? I want to look at PR build time. What are the things that you want to measure? What are your trial objectives, right? Have that in mind. And then all we need is 1 to 2 hours per week to work with you on this trial, right? So you don't need that much commitment. If you can spend 1 to 2 hours a week with us, we can help you, get this trial done. And that's the whole point of Gradle Enterprise. It's supposed to make this whole build process and build optimizations and tuning quite easy and more efficient than it normally would be. Right, and then you also need a server to install Gradle Enterprise, and as an optional, it's good to have other folks from other parts of your team participate. If you're the one who owns the builds, it could be great to have someone from DevOps to come in that owns the CI infrastructure, that Jenkins infrastructure, right, and talk about how Gradle Enterprise could be helpful with them. Also, the application developers, be great for them to participate, because they can use the build scans for self-service and kind of bring that developer point of view into it. It's optional, but it's usually becomes a much more successful trial when you have those folks on standby. Nelson, am I missing anything here? Anything you want to add?
No, the point about the server, it's not required before you fill out that trial form, and we'll work with you to understand the requirements, what exactly the server needs to do, but just understand that Gradle Enterprise is something that's installed on premise, and we'll get into the installation options in a bit. So it does require some installation.
Yeah, it's a good point, right? And what Nelson also mentioned in the previous slide was, hey, you could just fill out this form and say, hey, I'm interested in a trial. What kind of server do you need? I have a Java project, mono repo, 100 developers working on it, right? We'll give you some more information for you to be able to get this server and whatnot. And what can you expect from us along the way? We'll give you nice communication channels so you could chat with us via Slack or email or whatnot. You'll get technical support from us, right, during this process, right? We want Gradle Enterprise to and your builds to be optimized as much as possible, so we can see, hey, what kind of value you're getting from this. So we're going to be there for you, all sides for you, the support to during this 30 days. So we'll be quite accessible, and your trial project manager can get different folks from different teams involved as well, right? Hey, my Gradle Enterprise Jenkins plugin isn't working properly. We have somebody on a Jenkins committer on the Gradle Enterprise team. They can pull that person in, and he's responsible for the Jenkins Gradle plugin and whatnot. So we'll be there to support you during along this way. And you can send build scan dumps to us. Hey, my configuration time is super long on this build. I don't know what's going on, and I'm in my Gradle Enterprise trial. You could send this build scan dump to us.
Yeah, so because Gradle Enterprise is installed on premise, none of that data ever comes to us. But if you want us to look into a specific issue, we have ways of doing that. So for example, if you don't want us to have any of your build data, we can do a screen share and we can look at a build scan together. Another way is you can send us a very specific build scan dump. So that way you're not sending us all your data, you're just sending us this one build scan dump that we can look into very specifically. And that's something we do really often with customers. They send us a build scan, we send them some recommendations, say, hey, this plugin is doing this crazy thing, or this task should be cacheable, but it's not being cached. So that's a really big part of the whole trial experience.
Yeah, it's a good point. And as Nelson mentioned, this last item, right? Engineering reviews, right? If need be, we'll get on a screen share with you to look at it because we don't have access to your data. And you could send us support bundles. That's more around the Gradle Enterprise server, right? Hey, my server needs more memory. Our build scans are huge, right? What should we do, right? So there's ways that you can send information back to us without sharing all your build data, as Nelson mentioned.
So yeah, you don't have to be an expert in administering a server. If something goes wrong with your server, we can help you figure out what went wrong using these support bundles.
And then you have three different installation types. Nelson, you want to briefly talk about these?
Yeah, so the standard installation, you basically just run a script, and all these installation methods are, you can look at the documentation on the Gradle.com docs website. But so the standard installation, you basically just grab an AWS box and run a bash script, and then Gradle Enterprise is set up. It's that easy. And internet access is required. And then once it's running, you just click through an installer, you do the rest of the setup, which we'll get into later. This install method can also be done air-gapped. What that means is, let's say you have a secure environment that does not have access to the outside internet. You can download the entire installer and put it onto your box before to run the installer. Otherwise, the standard installer downloads everything it needs as it goes. And then the last option is Kubernetes. Let's say you already have a Kubernetes cluster you're administering. You can install Gradle Enterprise into its own namespace in your Kubernetes cluster. So you can use the resources you're already using. You can easily scale up and scale down Gradle Enterprise to make the most efficient use of your Kubernetes cluster. And this Kubernetes installation is also available in an air-gapped fashion if you don't have access to the outside internet for security purposes. Yeah, that's it.
Thanks for that. And then, so once you're installed, that's when your 30-day trial period starts. Some folks worried about that. Hey, I register for the trial, but it's going to take me a couple of weeks to get this server and install it. Did I just lose 2 weeks of my trial? No, we want to kind of start this trial period once you're installed and everything is good to go, right? So, and then once you're installed, right, we'll help you configure your Gradle Enterprise server. That's like the first step in the trial process, right? We'll set up backups and data retention, authentication, build cache node access, all this stuff.
Yeah.
So that'd be fun.
Another thing that's to note about this is Gradle Enterprise supports user authentication, so you can set access to the data that people on your team or your company have access to, and also different levels of access to different parts of the server. For example, you might not want all the developers accessing the administration page of the Gradle Enterprise server, so you can set different access limits in that way.
All right. And then we have this trial kickoff meeting where we talk about a few things, right? Once you kick off the trial, one of the first things we want to do is connect all your builds to Gradle Enterprise, local and CI builds. We want to just collect data on how things are going, right? What is the next item is capturing baseline. Maybe you're the build expert on the team, and maybe your builds are fast, right? You're using the build cache and whatnot, but are all your developers using that? How are all your developers running builds, right? So it's interesting to get all this data to really know what's going on in there before starting any optimizations, right? And that's where we capture this baseline, right? Where do we want to start? Okay, our average build time is 3 minutes now. Let's see how much faster we can get it. Our local builds, or if I'm an Android user and I want to look at assemble debug, right? Assemble debug time is around 5 minutes, and I want to improve that. So we kind of want to capture this baseline and starting point. And then we'll help you customize your build scans to model developer workflow, right? So we'll do stuff like Git integration, CI, Jenkins Team City integration, right? We're gonna set up tags to measure anything you want to measure, right? So part of what we talked about is this: you want to know what your trial success criteria is, right? What are my trial objectives, right? If we can show X, Y, and Z, I can recommend this product for a purchase, right? Or upper management wants to see us improve PR build times, or the QA team wants to see how often do developers run local builds with unit tests, and how long does that unit test time take? Can Gradle Enterprise improve that? So and we can show with caching and whatnot how often how much time savings you can get from the caching, remote cache or local cache for unit tests and whatnot. So you want to think about, hey, what are these things that we want to measure, and we can make all that possible and teach you how to do it and collect that data during this trial kickoff.
Yeah.
Anything you want to add here, Nelson?
Yeah, and it's not just about the data, but also integrating build scans into your workflow. So I find build scans to be much more helpful than, scroll that black Jenkins box. If you've ever scrolled through it to find that one line that tells you the error, build scans are so much easier if you use the Gradle Jenkins plugin. If you just click on the build scan, it'll tell you what went wrong with your build. And then once you know what's wrong with your build, you can use build scans to debug. You can compare it to other builds, things like that. So it's not just about collecting data, but also helping developers maximize the use of Gradle Enterprise to help them debug build failures.
All right.
Yeah.
And then we'll help you tune your build settings, right? And optimize your build settings and whatnot. Yeah, not sure what you want to add here, but yeah, some.
Yeah, well, this was kind of what we mentioned earlier. We'll do either a screen share or a build scan dump, and we'll look at it with you and to understand, what is normal as part of a build, right? Is a 10-second configuration time normal? Is it not normal? Well, that depends on the size of your project, what type of project it is. An Android, is it a web app? So we can help guide you and point out areas of your build that might not be performing normally. For example, if your configuration time is really long compared to your task execution time, we can say, okay, let's focus on your configuration time. Let's try removing plugins or using lazy task configuration. And we can, give you suggestions on what to do in your build scripts like deferring file access during configuration time to task execution time. And that'll really, that can really help with your build. I'll give an example with one of our clients. We found that the configuration time was really long. And so what that meant is that every single build has to run through the configuration phase. So any second you save in the configuration time is a second saved on every single build. And one of our customers, we realized was using a plugin, and this plugin was adding 60 seconds to the configuration time. And we worked with this customer to remove a couple lines in the in this plugin. This was actually an open source plugin that we fixed in the open source. And by removing a couple lines and simplifying the plugin, we saved 60 seconds on every single one of their builds. And if we didn't have Gradle Enterprise, we wouldn't know that this was a configuration phase problem related to this one specific plugin, because Gradle Enterprise gives you a breakdown of how much configuration time each plugin is adding to your build. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good point. We want to teach you some of, the best practices down the line, right? As Nelson mentioned. And since we don't have access to your data, sometimes we'll do a screen share and whatnot. It becomes really helpful with that. Then we begin what we call experiments, and to run these experiments with Gradle Enterprise and building the step-by-step process from our trial navigator, and to teach you how to get the most out of your incremental builds, out of your local cache, out of your remote cache. And as Nelson mentioned at the beginning, right, once you finish this trial, your build will be in a way better shape than it is now by going through these steps. And these steps are also meant to train you on the best practices as well. And of course, we'll run through all the different dashboards and flaky test detection and whatnot, right? Nelson, how was this for you when you were at SoundCloud? I know the trial process has gotten a bit more tidied up since then, but you did a lot of these experiments to find things that were breaking the cache and how to debug your cache misses. And how did all this work out for you? What were some of the highlights for you here?
Yeah, I mean, this was really, really key. We at SoundCloud, so there's this whole feature to Gradle Enterprise called task input comparison. And this is really like, some folks are like, oh, we use build scans, so what's the benefit of Gradle Enterprise? Or we use the build cache, what's the benefit of Gradle Enterprise? Or we use both build scans and the build cache, what is the benefit of Gradle Enterprise? And what I learned going through the trial process with SoundCloud, and by what you can do is you can compare two builds and see if the cache is being reused for those two builds. And this is possible with a feature called task input comparison in Gradle Enterprise. And what it'll do is, if you have 100 tasks, if all the inputs are the same and all the outputs are the same, then that cache entry can be reused. But what we found at SoundCloud was we're using build scans, we're using the cache, but the caches, the compilation tasks were not being reused whatsoever, because when we ran this input comparison, we realized that we had a compiler flag enabled on CI that was not enabled locally, and this was causing a cache miss for every single compile task. What that meant was we weren't getting any usage out of our cache. So having this Gradle Enterprise feature of task input comparison is really what makes, well, it's like one of the features that makes Gradle Enterprise so useful.
Yeah,
and yeah, there's also dashboards, trends, failures, flaky test detection. Having like, I've worked at a couple companies, and every single one I've worked at has built a flaky test dashboard. And it's fun to build these things, but it's kind of a waste of having to rebuild the same flaky test dashboard. So we give you the best flaky test dashboard that integrates all your builds automatically. You don't have to set anything up. And it makes it really easy to see like what's the top reason for flaky test failures in my project. Where should I focus my time tackling flaky tests?
No, that's a good point. Thanks for that. And as Nelson mentioned right earlier, right, one of the big benefits of Gradle Enterprise trial is at the end of this, we're working on increasing cacheability. Usually we get this to 80-90%, depending on the project, right? Um, and so the difference between turning on the cache and getting maybe 50% cache hits out of the box to 80-90% cache hits could be minutes and engineering time spent saved per build, right? And as we know, this thing can add up, right? And so speaking of adding up, right, at the end of this trial, right, once the 30 days are done and we've run through the experiments and we've gotten cacheability as high as it can be, right, and we know where your baseline is, so we'll start measuring and we'll help you make sense out of this data to say, hey, is Gradle Enterprise worth it, right? So we'll show you how you can, via your Gradle Enterprise dashboard, plug in some of this into our Gradle Enterprise ROI return on investment calculator. There's a link to this over here, and I'll show a quick example of this that I have saved here. I'm going to show this to you all now.
Yeah, and this is really key to help sell. Well, yeah, Ruzi, you're about to get into it, but we're engineers and we want to sell this to management, or I'm a manager and I need to justify the business case for Gradle Enterprise. We'll help you out with coming up with these numbers. Not coming up with, calculating these numbers to help you make a business case for using Gradle Enterprise at your company.
Yeah, and as Nelson mentioned, anyone who wants to purchase software that's more than $5,000, $10,000, $20,000 these days needs to submit some sort of business justification study. So we created the simple ROI calculator. This is the more nice UI version of it, but it's a simple spreadsheet that you just plug in some numbers, right?
You want to maximize it on your screen?
Yeah, and the numbers come from your trial data. So here's the URL. And so let's just pretend this is your Gradle Enterprise instance. This is actually the Spring Team's Gradle Enterprise instance. And some of the first things that we want to do is say, well, first, how many? So this is a 11-person engineering team, I think 10-person engineering team that's really active on this Spring Boot open source project. Thanks to the Spring team for allowing us to make this thing public and demo it. So you'd say, well, how many local builds am I running?
Sorry to cut you off.
No, please.
If you want to understand what Gradle Enterprise looks like, just go to ge.spring.io, the URL in the corner there, and you can feel free to explore around the data. And that way, you can get a feel for what the product actually will look like once you have it installed. Anyways.
Yeah. So all the builds come in here, and so one of the things we want to see is, hey, how many local builds do you run per week? So you see the start time last 7 days. Want to put a tag for local builds and see here. Okay, well they run around 228 local builds per week. Let's see how many CI builds they run. Around 291 CI builds per week, and then you can see, hey, how many CI failures do you have per week? That's around 20. And let's see how many local failures. It's around 90 local failures. And we look at this, we look at that to see, hey, how often our folks might have to investigate a local failure and whatnot, right? And then you can plug some of this stuff in. We also want to see, hey, so this is the performance dashboard for CI, right? So we saw here, so we know they run around 291 CI builds per week. Average CI build time is around 7 minutes, and they're saving around 31 minutes. And you can click on that and say, okay, well, they're saving around 25 minutes from this remote cache, and average build time is 7 minutes. So you just come in and plug this guy in here to this ROI calculator. I'm going to speed up the continuous integration test. So save average build time is around 7 minutes, 32 minutes without any optimization, right? 25 minutes saved from the cache, right? So around 7 minutes saved. And then it automatically gives you how much engineering time is saved. And what we say is, well, hey, you're not waiting on all CI builds to finish. Let's look at the engineering time so you could kind of slide this down. Usually folks are waiting around 20% of CI builds to finish. So just that itself, it's a pretty good savings. And then we want to see how much has local build time changed. So we look at the day you started the trial and the day you ended the trial. And then, we're looking at local builds. We come here and say, well, average build time for local builds. You could see this number on the right, this mean number here. At the beginning of the trial, this was 2.9, let's say 3 minutes. And then at the end of the trial, we got this thing to come down to 2 minutes. So we saved around 1 minute per local builds on average, right, across all local builds. And we plug that number in as well in here, saving around 1 minute per local builds. 3 minutes is your average build time before the trial. Now it's 2 minutes, saving around 1 minute, and then this is $11,000 saved. And then we also look at maintain build speed over time. If your build time increased by 30% this year, we see around Android projects, the build time increasing about 50% per year. This is just from the data we have from the Android Studio team. They get build time data back from their users. And you can also check this number with how much your code base increases per year. There's direct correlation there. Gradle core code base increase around 35% per year. So this would be, without Gradle Enterprise, this is how much this team would suffer, right? Just from, and what we say is, hey, with Gradle Enterprise, the performance dashboard and the trends view to find build time regressions and whatnot, you could quickly find them and act on them and use the insights from build scans to be proactive instead of reactive. You can help keep your build times down by 15%. And what is that worth to your organization? This number is pretty interesting. Hey team, if our build time goes up by 50% this year, how bad is that? Well, for this 10-person developer team, if their build time went up by 50% this year, it would cost them almost one full-time engineer, right? They would lose just the amount of hours wasted on that, right? And you put in the number of build failures and whatnot in here as well. How often do they fail? What's the average clean build time to kind of come up with how much time you could save from build scan. So these 4 interesting categories are saving this 10-person engineering team around $81,000 per year. And then you could print this to a PDF and whatnot. And of course, we'll help you build all this, right? And we'll even help put together a nice presentation for you with case studies from our previous customers and whatnot. And yeah, we'll help you kind of use this data to see, hey, is it worth us buying Gradle Enterprise or not, right? And that's kind of this ROI exercise here. And yeah, next steps. Complete a trial registration form. Tell us a bit about your project and what you want to accomplish, or if you have any questions, it's a great way to kind of ask about it here, right? What kind of server do I need, or this or that, and we'll get you going. And Q&A. Do you all have any questions here? And I can check the questions box.
Yeah, any questions or comments or anything we didn't cover?
All right, let me jump in from behind, Ruz, if I may. So we actually do have a couple of good questions. So the first one we're having is, someone is asking, we are currently facing build speed issues because dependency resolution is not implemented very effectively or efficiently. Can Gradle Enterprise help here? This question probably goes to you, Nelson. So
yeah, I have an answer for it, but I think Nelson would probably do a better job with this one.
Yeah, this is a really good question. It's actually something a lot of our customers face. Dependency resolution time is like actually the example I was giving earlier about one of our customers who had a plugin, their plugin was actually forcing dependency resolution to happen earlier than in the configuration phase. And this was what was adding 60 seconds to the build. And so we used Gradle Enterprise, we used the build scans, we saw that the plugin was adding a lot of time to the configuration phase. So normally dependency resolution should not happen during the configuration phase. But if we're seeing that dependency resolution is happening during the configuration phase, the first thing is, well, you'll get a setting in the suggestion in the in the performance tab of Gradle Enterprise. It'll say this dependency was resolved during configuration time. And once you know which dependency is resolved during configuration time, you can take a look at that build.gradle file and examine possible options of why why that's happening. And we can also help you with that. So if you send us a build scan dump, or we can do a screen share, we can take a look at your build.gradle file, and we can help you figure out what is causing that long dependency resolution time. So yeah, that's exactly what Gradle Enterprise is all about.
Yeah, and you have some more info on dependency download times. We were doing a trial with one team, and we noticed, hey, okay, well, this remote build cache is doing quite well on saving build times for their CI builds. And we noticed 10-minute dependency download time. And part of this was exacerbated by this, the coronavirus working from home thing. But the team hadn't really noticed that. Nobody was really complaining about that this thing was up at 10 minutes. And we fixed it, brought it down to 3 minutes, and that was as low as it could be considering the situation. So we also get some more interesting data there, and we'll teach you how to use the build diff and whatnot to learn more about what's changing in your dependencies and whatnot. So I have a question here from a friend of ours. Venkat has a good question here. It says, hey, during the trial, do you folks guide on writing good and best practices in your build.gradle file? So it's not really a part of the trial process, Venkat, but we've ended up having to look at a few of these via screen share. With one customer, there was the way they had set up their builds and their build scripts, there was some stuff there that was breaking build caching. And so during the trial process, we want to get your cacheability as high as it can be. And sometimes you have these things that's kind of hurting your cacheability, and we might need to dive into those best practices. So it's not really included in the trial process to do that. Right, though we have other ways to help you do that, but if we have to, if it's blocking kind of getting the most value out of this trial, we might end up having to go there. So yes and no, but if we really need to look under there with you, we can.
All right, another question that's probably best suited for you, Nelson, is as a result of me investigating Gradle Enterprise, we just decided to turn on build cache, and our build times dropped quite dramatically as a result. Do you still think we could cut times down by 50% in 30 days? Probably with Gradle Enterprise.
Yeah, this is a really good question. One, I guess, other question I have is, did you turn on the local cache or the local cache and the remote cache? Because there's two parts to that. So if you enable the local cache, you're going to get a huge speed up in builds already. But if you're not using the remote cache yet, which is a part of Gradle Enterprise, you can also get a huge speed up for local builds, because you'll be reusing, you won't even have to build anything. You'll just download it. And especially on compilation tasks, that'll save you a huge amount of time. The other thing is for CI, because CI is constantly rebuilding very, very similar tasks, you'll also cut down your CI times. And this is where we see the biggest improvements, is when we turn on the remote build cache for CI, build times just start dropping. And this is where we can save your company a lot of money, because you won't have to have, you won't have to have as many CI resources. You'll get faster feedback for your developers. You'll spend less money on CI times, and it'll also be more scalable. I've been on a lot of teams that have had issues scaling their CI as more and more team members join, and it's not just team members, but as the code base grows, and being able to reuse the build cache on CI, really, it saves tons of time. Like sometimes the build improvements are up to 90%. Now, the second thing is, if you have the remote build cache enabled, because you can just install a remote build cache without Gradle Enterprise, even if you have that enabled, you're likely not getting the full benefit of that remote cache. To give you an example, and I kind of briefly mentioned this earlier, at SoundCloud, we had the remote cache before we started the Gradle Enterprise trial. And what we realized was that not almost, every single compilation task in our entire project was not being cached, was not being able to be reused from the remote build cache. And that was because of a difference in the configuration between our CI and our local builders. We had a flag turned on CI that was an input to the compilation task, and that flag was not enabled locally. And so we were getting no benefit from the remote build cache. So so what I would say is, yes, even if you do have the cache enabled, we can definitely improve your build speeds, and definitely up to 50%, even more than 50%. It's a really good question.
And for the local cache as well, right? I think the question was from Yurik, and he mentioned. So one of the things that we do during the experiments is, one, we want to turn off all caching and see, hey, how well are your incremental builds working? And this is where Gradle projects, right? Maven doesn't have incremental builds, right? And to see, hey, is my incrementalness, I don't know if that's a real word or not, but what's the maximum, how well can I get my incrementalness, these up-to-date checks, to be as efficient as possible? So we do these experiments with build scans on how you do that, right? On, hey, I'm going to run a build, and run it clean, and then run the build again with no changes, and everything should be incremental, and these certain things are not. Why, right? And then after really optimizing incremental builds, then we go and move on to the local cache. And these two kind of feed on each other. So by doing that, we even optimize your local cache as well. Now, if your local cache is at 99% cache hits, then we'll see how much we can do. But we usually always find something interesting there.
Yeah, and what's interesting is, especially if you have custom build logic, custom build tasks, or you're using plugins from open source plugins, not all your tasks might be cacheable by default. And so what you can do is, you can take a look at a build scan, you can filter it by tasks that are not cacheable, and then you can take a look at which ones are taking the most amount of time in your build. So one thing about Gradle Enterprise is, you have hundreds of tasks in your project, hundreds of parts of your build, but it really helps you focus on what's more important. So you can filter which tasks are not cacheable and which ones are taking the most amount of time, and you can focus on those tasks and make them cacheable, whether it's an open source plugin or locally, and we can help you figure out what's the best way to make that task cacheable. To give you an example, there was a customer that was running basically what's essentially a transform, a task that takes class files as an input and creates class files as an output. And then this task was adding a timestamp at the top of each at the top of each file. What that means is the outputs of that task are not cacheable, because every time it runs, it's going to regenerate that timestamp. And so with Gradle Enterprise, you can use task input comparison and run, because when you look at the task, it'll say it was cached, but the outputs can't be reused because the timestamp is different. So we used the task input comparison to compare what was different between the two builds, and that's how we realized that there was this header that each file had that had the timestamp. And so once you know this, there's a couple of options. One is you can add another task that or like an action inside this task that removes that line from the build file. You can also update the task itself if it's within your control to not produce that timestamp. Or you can file an issue with the open source plugin to not add that timestamp. And this is something we see in a lot of builds, that this timestamp being added, and that causes cache misses. So Gradle Enterprise can really help you understand, where is this cache miss and why it's happening and what to focus on.
And that leads to kind of the next question as well, which is, don't you get most described success factors with standard Gradle as well? Yeah, you have this local cache, and you can kind of build your own cache backend for this remote shared cache, how Nelson and the team were doing at SoundCloud. But it's not just about the cache, because when you turn this cache on, you may get 30-40% cache hits out of the box. For it was even less, I think, for Nelson and team when they tried it out. And without the data and whatnot, you really can't see where to make the improvements. So it's essentially the best way to answer this is, we want Gradle Enterprise to give you the data and the insights and the build scans to, hey, I have 1 hour to spend on builds this week. What can I do? How should I prioritize this to get the most developer productivity for all of our engineers, right? Yeah.
It's like the same way you run analytics on your, let's say you're running an Android app and you have crash reports, right? You're not going to take a look at the crash report that happens once a day to one person. You're going to take a look at the crash report that's happening to the most amount of users. And the same way with Gradle Enterprise, you can focus on, the part of your build that's taking the longest amount of time for the most amount of developers. And that's what makes it really effective compared to just having a single build scan.
All right. I think
yeah.
Oh, Ruth, sorry to jump in, but I think the next, there was a question that I would like to squeeze in here because it's also related to the build cache. My Eclipse build ship instance does not reuse cache results from the command line. Can I investigate the problems with Enterprise too?
Eclipse build ship. Is that a Gradle build or a Maven build?
It's a Gradle build.
It's a Gradle build.
Are you familiar with the build ship plugin?
No, I'm not familiar with
it. I'm pretty sure Eclipse build ship works well with Gradle, but I don't think we know the answer to this question. Maybe you can get this person's email, Dennis, and we can email, I think it's from Marcus, we can email Marcus directly.
Yeah. There's also the Gradle community Slack if you have more questions like that, or just fill out a trial form and ask us.
Okay, so one was regarding NDAs, right? So this question is, for one application system, we couldn't even talk about purchasing because our legal team and the other company couldn't even agree on an NDA. Do I need to get my legal team involved for the trial? It depends on, the company that you work with. With Gradle Enterprise, it's a bit easier because it's on premise and you're not sending any data back. You might need an NDA if you want to do a screen share with us, right? For, hey, my garbage collection time is really long. What's going on? Or something's wrong with my dependencies. Now we take a look, and the dependencies are the names of these libraries that you're using that may be, a secret, right? Or in some cases, we had this one customer, we were doing a trial, we noticed the project names kind of are these secret products that they're working on, and we needed to stop the trial, and they continued the trial. We just couldn't do these screen shares with them to see. So we're really easygoing when it comes to NDAs. We haven't we have customers from really large software companies that are super secretive and to Wall Street banks, and we haven't had a problem with that. So I think we should be okay. But that's a great thing for you to kind of just ask in the form and fill out a trial form, and we can get it going if need be. We're running out of time, so we should go through these fairly fast. There's 2 more left. Is it possible to get faster performance fixes in Gradle while using Gradle Enterprise? To get your performance fixes in faster, or maybe he's talking about performance fixes in Gradle Core while using Gradle Enterprise. I think that is what the question is.
Yeah. So I'm not sure I understand the question, but the Gradle Enterprise is like a tool to help you understand what's happening in your build, and using those insights, you can improve your Gradle build in your project. So if you use Gradle, the performance improvements will be applicable for sure.
Okay, so I got to follow up there. He means performance bugs in Gradle Core, like for example, dependency resolution. Yeah, I mean, if we find something like that, a bug or whatnot, the solution, the engineer working with you, if it's somebody like Dennis, will send that to the team. It's a separate team. The Gradle Core build tool team is a separate team of engineers, and they have their own kind of agenda, with 10 million downloads a month and all the forums and releasing every 4 to 6 weeks. So depending on how big the impact and whatnot is, yeah, no guarantees, but we could certainly, get that to their attention.
Yeah, I guess maybe I'm understanding it in a different way. Maybe like we use the insights from build scans from our customers to guide the feature development in the Gradle build tool, as well as third-party plugins like the Android Gradle plugin, and to focus on what will be the performance feature that would help the most of our customers. So for example, if we see that snapshotting task inputs is taking a long time for our customers, then that helped us guide the feature development of file system watching in the Gradle build tool itself.
Yeah, that's a good point.
And we also use Gradle Enterprise internally for the build tool. Yeah.
All right, and the last question here, is it possible to, oh no, we already did that one, sorry. Why are there 2 .gradle folders in Gradle project? This is more of a build tool question, but if you want to take a stab at it, Nelson, why are there 2 .gradle folders in my Gradle project?
Well, it's there because that's how you configured it. So you can have any number of build.gradle files in your project. It just depends on how you want to divide your project. For very, very small projects, it's not necessary to have 2 build.gradle files. You can configure it just to have 1 build.gradle file and put all your sources in one directory. Some tools, such as the Android Gradle plugin, will generate 2 build.gradle files when you create an empty project. One is sort of like the top level build file that doesn't really do anything, and then the other one is where you apply the Android application plugin. But it's definitely not a necessary part. You can definitely simplify it and combine it into one. That being said, for larger projects, it makes sense to have more build.gradle files, and you can put common logic into your root build.gradle file, and then start to modularize your code base as it grows and move that logic into separate build.gradle files. So yeah, it just depends on your build. Gradle is really flexible and adapts to projects of all sizes, from really, really small to really, really big. I hope that answers the question.